Good evening. My name is Pat Young. I'm Planning and Development Director for the City of Raleigh. Thank you so much for being with us tonight on our Reflecting Raleigh conversation around stormwater, weathering the storm. Last week, many of you attended our event here in the same facility. Heard from Ted Brown, who's a national expert on stormwater management, stormwater mitigation, working with nature to reduce flooding and water quality impacts. And he laid a really nice foundation of how the regulatory environment works and how stormwater works in general, and what we can do as communities to continue the good work that our colleagues that I'll introduce here in a moment are doing. Tonight we're going to hear from my colleagues that work with the city and on one of our advisory committees to talk about what we're doing here in Raleigh. And it's a really great story. You should be very proud of what Raleigh has done. We've only had rules for stormwater for just over 20 years. Most of our city was built without stormwater management or regulations, and so it's a generational effort to try to mitigate and manage what was done in the past to make sure that flooding is reduced and water quality is protected. And that's really what this is all about. This is a part of a series of conversations that are part of the kickoff of our Reflecting Raleigh Comprehensive Plan, which is our community-wide vision plan that will take us through the year 2050. It really helps identify how we want to grow as a community. This is the second in a series. The first was in August, the Affordable Housing Summit, where we talked about affordable housing issues and opportunities. You can find that session online or on our website. And tonight, of course, is on stormwater. In February, we'll be meeting on transportation and mobility, and in March on trees and how to protect those in Raleigh. So before I introduce our panelists, I want to just do some quick housekeeping. Please get some food if you haven't yet. It's excellent. Best food I've had at a government meeting, and I've been doing this for 29 years. If you need to use the restroom, please go out the door to your left. If you need childcare, that's out the door to the right. And if you need translation services, please see my colleague, Alyssa Haley-Schramm. Please raise your hand. I know you're eating. I'm sorry, Alyssa. If you need translation services. So tonight, after we hear from my colleagues, we're going to have a short question and answer session for our panelists. And then, most importantly for me, have a community conversation. We want to hear from you. What are your priorities? What are your interests? What are your issues? What do you think Raleigh can do to make sure that we do the best we possibly can in stormwater? One more editorial comment, and then I'll introduce our panelists. Some of these issues we're talking about in growth are very emotional and have a lot of value to them, right? How should our communities change? How much traffic should we accept before we look at other modes of transportation? Stormwater, as you're going to hear from my colleagues, is really an issue where we have a lot of solutions. It's just a matter of really resources and priorities. So we want to hear from you about where we get those resources, how we prioritize to make sure that we have equity and high quality stormwater management. So with me tonight are Wayne Miles. Wayne is on my right, your left. Wayne's our Raleigh Stormwater Program Manager. He's been in that position for 6 years, but has over 36 years of stormwater, water, wastewater, and reclaimed water engineering experience. In the consulting field, he assisted over 100 communities with developing their stormwater management programs, and like the one he runs here in Raleigh. He's co-authored a number of manuals and policy documents about compliance with the Clean Water Act and on different topics of stormwater. Wayne is a bachelor's and master's degree in environmental engineering from the University of Florida, but we won't hold that against him. Also with us tonight is Reverend Jemonde Taylor. Reverend Taylor is the chair of our Stormwater Management Advisory Commission. Since 2012, Reverend Taylor has served as the rector of St. Ambrose Episcopal Church in Southeast Raleigh. His congregation helped birth the environmental justice movement in response to flooding and decades of dumping raw sewage into Walnut Creek. So he comes to this issue very honestly and has been a great champion of our efforts to improve stormwater. Thank you. He certainly deserves that. He holds undergraduate and graduate degrees in mechanical engineering from NC State and Stanford Universities, as well as Master of Divinity from the General Theological Seminary in New York City. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah Shaughnessy, who's my colleague, principal planner, who's helping run our comprehensive plan process, and Sarah will moderate the conversation. Thank you all so much.
All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you again for being here. We're so happy to see so many faces. I'm going to start with a level-setting question. Wayne, for non-engineers in the room, could you give us a quick Stormwater Management 101? What are some of the basic principles? How long have we been doing it in Raleigh? A little bit about the history.
Sure, glad to, Sarah, and thanks everyone for coming out. What a great day to talk about stormwater today. We ordered that up just for today. So the basic principles of stormwater are in a forested environment. You have rain and you have trees divert a lot of that rain, and you have roots that uptake rain, and you have the rainfall that falls into the soil, and it takes a few tenths of an inch, maybe a half an inch, before you actually get runoff. And runoff is what doesn't sink into the soil and then ends up in your streams, in your creeks. So as we develop, build infrastructure, build roads, build houses and buildings, we pave over that soil. We cut down trees, and both of those have impacts in terms of stormwater. The trees don't absorb as much of the water. You don't get as much of the rainfall infiltrating into the ground, and so you get more runoff, and you get that runoff occurring faster. So your streams have more flow in them, they have more volume, and that can lead to downstream impacts. It can erode stream banks. It can cause, for larger events, downstream flooding. And the runoff, when you have oils, car impacts, other pollutants on those hard surfaces, that can impact the water quality in the streams as well. So urbanization, we know, has lots of impacts on stormwater. It's, as Pat Young mentioned, though, it's really only been about the last 20 years that Raleigh has had regulations to help mitigate those impacts. Stormwater detention ponds, water quality ponds, and regulatory requirements for developers to install those. So we had, as you know, a lot of development that occurred before 2002 when those regulations went in place. So we are still faced with the challenges of that legacy development that occurred before we had stormwater regulations. And then even for very large events, the stormwater detention that we put in helps mitigate the impacts, but it doesn't completely eliminate those. So those areas can create challenges as well.
Thank you. And then another quick question for you. So concerns about downstream flooding, stream quality, other issues like you mentioned earlier often get raised in the context of growth and development. Raleigh is a pretty rapidly growing city. We're seeing a lot of new development, infill development, new greenfield development. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about sort of the relationship between stormwater and land use patterns, specifically stormwater and density, and sort of what that looks like.
Yeah, definitely. So, you know, I gave the basics, but I want to talk a little bit about the change in mindset. If you go back in the 40s, 50s, even through the 80s and maybe into the 90s, the mindset for stormwater engineering was, if it's flooding, put it in a pipe and get it out of here as fast as you can, and that will help mitigate the flooding in that area. Now, what that caused was there was always somewhere downstream that mindset would create more flooding. So we just kept trying to push the problems further and further downstream. And as development went out in Raleigh, it just became more and more of an issue. And that doesn't mitigate that mindset of just piping it somewhere, doesn't mitigate the water quality impacts. So the more recent mindset that engineers have is, as we've learned, we want to slow down that stormwater. We want to spread it out, and we want to try to mimic nature as much as possible with green stormwater infrastructure that then infiltrates that stormwater into the soil as much as possible. Even if that's a man-made facility, it still provides lots of benefits in terms of mitigating downstream flooding and improving water quality. Now, we're still going to have storms that are big enough to cause flooding. That's natural. So the other aspect of what we need to do from a planning perspective is become more resilient as a community. So we know where the creeks are. We know where those creeks tend to flood. We designate those floodplains. And now we have imposed more stringent development regulations to keep that development out of the floodplains. However, before we had those types of regulations, there was a lot of development built in the floodplains that is still there. So we are dealing with a legacy issue while also trying to be better about how we develop in the future.
Great. Reverend Taylor, based on your professional experience, your lived experience, your work with your church, how do you see urbanization and growth impacting stormwater runoff? And what have been some specific impacts in Raleigh that you've noticed over the years?
It's good to be with you this evening. Just to begin with the story of my congregation, I serve as rector of St. Ambrose Episcopal Church in Rochester Heights. In 1956, a couple of things happened. One, the city of Raleigh stopped dumping raw sewage into Walnut Creek. That same year, the city zoned 2 neighborhoods for black people to live during segregation. So if you were black in Raleigh in the 1950s, 60s, and you wanted to buy a house, you had 2 options, Battery Park and Rochester Heights. Now, Rochester Heights is next to the Walnut Creek wetland. And when the city stopped dumping sewage in 1956 and then zoned that area as an area for black people to live, it's problematic for a number of reasons. One, for 7 decades, the city had dumped sewage in that location. And also, when residents purchased homes in the 1950s and 60s, they were promised that their homes would not flood. And their homes did indeed flood. If you drive on Bailey Drive, going toward Gardner Road, and look to your right, there is all of this green space. There used to be at least 15 homes on that property. And if you go to Google Maps, you still see the rectangular outline of the houses that were platted for that area, but were effectually washed off their foundation. And so when we talk about urbanization and flooding, my lived experience in Southeast Raleigh and as rector of St. Ambrose Church in Rochester Heights is that when it rains elsewhere, it pours where I am. We talk about climate change, and climate change actually does exist. I do not deny this fact. And yet, I think one of the biggest stressors for flood-prone areas like Rochester Heights would be non-climate stressors, which is the development in the watershed. For those who don't know a lot about stormwater, I think the beautiful thing about stormwater is the definition is in the name. So if you know German, even if you don't know what the word means in German, the definition is in the name. So stormwater is just water that happens after the storm that flows, as Wayne said. Watershed is the direction in which the water sheds or flows given the topography of a particular area. And so when I talk about Walnut Creek, and the Walnut Creek watershed, this 46 square mile watershed, all the development that happens at the headwaters in Cary, because Walnut Creek begins in Cary, flowing through Lake Johnson, through Rochester Heights, and making its way towards the Neuse River and on its way to the Atlantic Ocean. All of the rain that is not absorbed, as Wayne said, flows into Walnut Creek. So when we talk about stormwater and development, the good news is we have the technology and the expertise to do better. And Raleigh has been doing better. One of the crown jewels as we talk about stormwater and urbanization would be the Colonnade. Many of you know the Colonnade. It is at 540 and Six Forks Road. It is where Whole Foods is. Before that area was developed, it was wooded space. After the development, more water stays on the ground the way it looks now than it did when it was grass and trees. because through technology, through green stormwater infrastructure, through cisterns and swells and silver cells, water that normally would have flown off-site is captured and retained on-site, impacting what I call the 2 V's of stormwater: your volume, which is your amount of stormwater, and your velocity, which is your speed of water. And so urbanization is real. Raleigh continues to grow. It continues to sprawl. And we have the expertise to mitigate stormwater and mitigate flooding. And when we think about stormwater design, giving the past neglects in underinvested communities, the good news is that as technology continues to grow, we can mitigate that. Though we cannot right what was done in the past or change what was done in the past, we can move forward in a direction to mitigate the harm that's been done in certain communities and move to a space that is just better for the environment.
Thank you so much. You mentioned we, sort of indicating that as a community we have responsibilities to make these decisions and implement better management practices. Wayne, could you talk a little bit about what the city's responsibility is, what is in the city's purview and what is not, and then turn back to you and ask what other responsibilities may be.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. So the city actually has multiple roles related to stormwater. We are a regulator. We have city ordinances that require, as development occurs everywhere in the city development, private development, stormwater controls must be put in. And we've actually recently updated our stormwater design manual to modernize what those requirements are. And any development that is proposed for the city, they have to submit their engineering design plans to the city. Stormwater plan reviewers review those to make sure they're consistent with all the regulations. And then as those plans are approved and constructed, we have inspectors that go out and monitor to make sure that that construction is being done in compliance with the approved plans and in compliance with all other regulations, such as sediment and erosion control, to control sediment from being washed off a site during construction. So we have folks that go out and inspect those construction sites to ensure those are working properly, being maintained. The city, though, is also a developer. We build a lot of stuff in the city. And so we have to follow all of our regulations, but we also want to go above and beyond the regulations. And so the city's recently adopted a policy called the Green Stormwater Infrastructure Policy that basically says whenever the city is doing a project that disturbs land, we must evaluate how to incorporate green stormwater infrastructure practices into that development to go above and beyond. A couple examples are on the screens. The new City Hall building that's under construction right now has green terraces and underground storage in the tree boxes, silver cells, as Father Taylor mentioned, that help collect that stormwater and infiltrate it into the ground. The Gibson Play Plaza out at Dix Park has stormwater wetlands, bioretention, capturing stormwater from the parking lots. And so the city wants to be a good steward. We want to put our money where our mouth is. And in order to lead by example, we hope to encourage all the other developers to go above and beyond and implement these types of best practices in stormwater management as well. And we have a number of great programs. Those of you who were here last week saw representatives of the stormwater program talking about drainage assistance and rainwater rewards and creek restoration, stream stabilization programs. We've got a lot of team members here. If you're interested in learning more about the city's programs, we have a lot of opportunities to help private property owners better manage stormwater on their properties.
That's great. And is there a role for private citizens and developers that play in stormwater management?
Absolutely. Wayne talked more on the macro level, on the larger level with city. And then macro level, we have a number of programs with stormwater. One is called Rainwater Rewards, R cubed. This is a program that is available for Raleigh residents, even nonprofits and for-profits and corporations, to have a cost share relationship with the city in order to install green stormwater infrastructure on property. For example, St. Ambrose, the church where I'm rector, has a number of green stormwater infrastructure installations on our property. We have 3 rain gardens that pull in about, 1,000 square feet between the 3 rain gardens. We have 2 1,000-gallon cisterns that take the water from our high-pitched roof, collects it in these cisterns, and we use that for drip line irrigation. We have a number of porous installations that we change from impervious to porous to just be better, in our language, stewards of the environment. When we worked with the city to install some of this green stormwater infrastructure, the engineer came and measured the absorption rate of our soil. And she said, you have baseball grade soil. This is the highest absorption rate of any soil we've measured in the city of Raleigh. I said, you should know this. You're standing on holy ground. This is sacred soil. And even though we have all of these green stormwater infrastructures, they have a cost share program with the city of Raleigh, depending on watershed, 90% or 75%. These installations were done before I was on the advisory commission, so there was no conflict of interest. I just have to be the beneficiary of some people with foresight, and thank former SMAC, we'll get into SMAC later, that authorized those installations. But we encourage citizens to do this on property. If there is water pooling in someone's yard, that might be an opportunity for a rain garden, which is a small retention pond that looks beautiful. When people hear rain garden, they think it's full of water all the time. It's only full of water after a large rain event. Water pools in this retention pond that has natural plantings of plants that have a good relationship with water, that really won't drown because of water. And so an area that is soggy could become an area that's beautiful. And so we encourage citizens of Raleigh to do this because, one, it helps the environment. Also, it's a good advertisement for the City of Raleigh programs. And the more programs we can get in citizens' homes or on different properties, the better it is for the environment. And I think we could then have a good case to increase budgets. We can do more and more of this in the City of Raleigh.
Thank you. I'll let you hold on to the mic. You mentioned SMAC, or the Stormwater Advisory Commission. Could you speak a little bit about the role of that body? What role do they serve?
Well, I think SMAC has the best name of all of the city commissions. I'll talk about how I got on SMAC. I'm entering, or actually in my 6th year on the commission, and you are allowed to serve 2 3-year terms consecutively. So I'm coming to the end of my second 3 years. I became interested in SMAC probably around 2018. I'd never heard of SMAC. And I was talking with a person who was on SMAC who encouraged me to go online and fill out the application. And the chief reason I decided to be on SMAC was SMAC sets policy, design policy that impacts flooding. You've already heard that I live or pastor a church that experiences flooding. So I wanted a seat and voice at the table to impact design and flooding. Also, I wanted to bring in a mindset as one who's trained as an engineer. How can we engineer into the system equity, engineer an acknowledgement of past underinvestment in certain communities so that we can move forward in a positive direction. So you can see the members of SMAC on the screen in front of you. These are 10 volunteers who meet monthly for around 2 hours. And what is unique about SMAC when you think about stormwater nationwide, by and large, you have stormwater staff, and Wayne heads stormwater staff for Raleigh. And in most communities, that's it. Raleigh is unique because there is this advisory commission that works in relationship with staff. The budget that goes to the city council has to be passed by SMAC, and then we recommend that to the city council. We've talked about UDOs, the ordinances, the laws that developers and those who build must follow. That redesign process is done in partnership with city staff, and SMAC has to stamp it and then recommend that to the city of Raleigh for voting and changing. And so when I think about SMAC, the Stormwater Management Advisory Commission, it is unique from Raleigh's standpoint in that there is this relationship with staff and volunteers. We are the 10 SMAC members who are Raleigh residents. Some of us are engineers and professionals in stormwater. Some are community members. Some have experience in development, and we all meet once a month, the first Thursday of the month, to talk about stormwater. And what I can say, one of the things we have been moving toward is how to do more forecasting, how to plan in such a way that we can build for the future, acknowledging that what was done in the past perhaps was not done with the best foresight, and we can try to mitigate that and change that as we move to the future.
Thank you. So you both have mentioned a number of programs, really great projects that the city is doing. How does the city pay for its programs and projects?
Yeah, so the city of Raleigh, about 20 years ago now, put together a stakeholders group that was appointed by city council to look at the city's level of service related to stormwater and how to pay for that. And after about a year-long process of looking at the level of service and evaluating that, the stakeholders group came to the conclusion that the city needed a higher level of service related to flood control, water quality control, and development standards. And so they recommended this higher level of service. And to go along with that, the stakeholders group recommended to City Council that an impervious surface-based utility fee be created. And so the way once this was implemented, passed by City Council, that stakeholder group turned into SMAC. And so now the city, on your monthly water and sewer bill, you will see a line for stormwater. And for most residential properties, that is $7.65 per month. And then for commercial properties, we actually go into aerial photographs, measure the amount of impervious surface on a property, that's parking lots, building rooftops, driveways, sidewalks. We measure that impervious area, and the bill for that commercial property is increased proportionately to the amount of impervious surface. So commercial properties actually pay quite a bit more in proportion to that amount of impervious surface. And so that's every month that those fees that are paid are sent into stormwater, and that pays about 95% of our stormwater bill. The remaining part of our programs are funded through developer fees and permit fees that pay for the plan reviewers and the inspections and so forth. But by far the majority of the revenues that are collected are from that stormwater utility fee based on impervious surface. And we believe that is a more fair way of paying for stormwater programs, because impervious surface, as we've discussed, is really a good indicator of stormwater impacts. So the more impervious surface a property has, the more stormwater impacts it's going to have. So by conclusion, they should pay more into the program that is aimed at mitigating those stormwater impacts.
Thank you. I have a question for both of you now. I'll start with you, Reverend Taylor. How does the city consider equity in its stormwater programs? You spoke a little bit about inequitable practices in the past. Mm-hmm. How have you seen those practices being rectified or addressed today?
Stormwater, from the city standpoint, from staff standpoint, and also SMAC has been a leading edge when we talk about equity, which by definition is how to increase the amount of engagement for all the residents of the city of Raleigh. If there is a particular zip code or demographic that is not involved in the process, that's a problem. We want to draw the circle as large as possible and get the maximum amount of engagement from individuals. And so when we talk about SMAC, I mentioned that SMAC has a number of members, 10 members. I think Stormwater was one of the first commissions that actually segmented these are the types of individuals with background and demographic that we desire to be a part of SMAC. When we think more recently, I mentioned the Rainwater Rewards program, where we try to encourage residents to install green stormwater infrastructure, rain garden cisterns on their property. What we saw was that even though this is a cost share program, there were still residents in the city of Raleigh where that barrier was still too high. Even though it was 75% cost share, that barrier was too high. So about 2 years ago, we were able to use some ARPA funds to pilot the 100% Rainwater Rewards program. What this means is that given a particular area, given particular income, time lived on property, that individuals can apply for the 100% Rainwater Rewards program and get a rain garden and a cistern at 100%. We piloted that beginning in 2021, 22, if that's right, Wayne. And those funds, of course, are sunsetting soon. And by working with the city of Raleigh through City Council, we're able to secure funding to make this program a permanent part of Rainwater Rewards. What began as a pilot project last year, 18 months ago, now is a permanent part of Raleigh Rainwater Rewards program. Around a year or so ago, we engaged with a consulting firm that had conversations with SMAC members, with Stormwater staff, with other community stakeholders on the topic of equity. And after a year of reviewing documentation, this consulting firm has issued a report with some recommendations that the Stormwater staff could do and SMAC could do as relates to equity. The good news is that Stormwater was already doing a lot, and there is also space for improvement. And so we're in the process of implementing and discussing those recommendations so we can continue to try to increase engagement in as many communities and places as possible.
Just anything you wanted to add to that, Wayne?
Yeah, I would. Father Taylor covered it well, and there's really many ways that equity is incorporated into our operational programs, our hiring, our engagement. We do track demographics of engagement, and if we're missing some demographics, look for ways to specifically tailor getting input from those neighborhoods, from those areas that we're missing. One example project I'd like to talk about where we did just that is the Rose Lane project. Rose Lane is a situation, and it's been like this for probably 30 years since the Beltline was built. It's a neighborhood of about 55 homes, and there's only one way in and one way out of that neighborhood, and that road is named Rose Lane, and that road crosses Walnut Creek. And the way it was built, and as flood prone as Walnut Creek is and continues to be because of upstream development, Rose Lane would flood once or twice a year. And so this has been a high priority on our project, and it's an equity issue. Many homes in that neighborhood are Habitat for Humanity homes, and they're vulnerable. They're higher impact homes. Let me give you an example. If Rose Lane floods and the folks in that neighborhood can't get out, first of all, it's a public safety issue. If there needs to be an emergency response, and there have been swift water rescues, so that's an issue regardless. But even above and beyond that, the folks that live in that neighborhood tend to be more vulnerable. They tend to have jobs that you can't just Zoom call in that day. If you can't get out of your neighborhood, they would be more likely to have a job. They would have to be there in person. And so maybe if their road's flooded and they can't get out, they're more likely to have to take a vacation day. Or worse yet, maybe they don't even get paid that day. So the impacts on those types of neighborhoods from an equity standpoint can be much higher. And so that raises the priority for us. And so we're addressing that specific issue in two ways. Number one, we have been learning to operate an upstream reservoir, Lake Johnson, which is upstream on Walnut Creek, so that we can pre-lower that reservoir level when we know a storm is coming, to provide more flood storage in that reservoir. And that reduces the amount of flooding that occurs downstream. And we've been actually, over the last 4 or 5 years, we've been doing this really very successful. Instead of flooding once or twice a year, it's only flooded once or twice in the last 5 years. So we can't fix it completely, but we can make it be a lot better. And so that's something that we've implemented quickly. And then we're also implementing a larger capital improvements project that we've just gone through the alternatives analysis and selected an alternative, that we will be constructing a secondary access that goes a different direction, that will provide more resilience. It will be safer during large flooding events, so that if and when Rose Lane does flood, we can block that off with barricades, and the residents from that neighborhood can still get in and out safely. So those types of issues, equity definitely becomes a factor in terms of how we approach a project and the priority of that project as well.
Wayne did an outstanding job of talking about the flood control. To me, this is one of the most impressive projects that Stormwater in the city of Raleigh has delved into. He talked about not only equity, but it's a combination of dealing with some decisions in the past that impacted people. One might argue of a certain socioeconomic status, the use of technology, of working with meteorologists, of projecting with a large storm event. We know if we have at least a week's lead time, that if 4 inches of rain, 5 inches of rain is projected, that equates to 4 or 5 feet in Lake Johnson. So you lower the lake, rain comes, the lake fills up, and as Wayne has said, instead of once or twice a year, maybe once or twice now in 5 years. And then with the development and getting new egress and ingress for the Rose Lane residents. In my opinion, if you wanted to put stormwater in a package and put a nice bow on it and say, this is what's possible, this is what we can do, it is this project. And I think this is leading edge for the city of Raleigh, and there is more of this to come.
That's great. One final question for both of you. Start with you, Reverend Taylor. Where do you see the city stormwater program going in the future? Where do you think our challenges and our biggest opportunities are?
As I mentioned, this is my 6th year on SMAC. In those 6 years of evolution, or 6 years of time, I've seen the evolution in the deepening of relationship between SMAC and city staff. I've already talked about the importance of SMAC in setting code and passing the budget. And over the past 5 years, that relationship has deepened. One of the things that we have been doing as SMAC is that we've asked ourselves, how can we better use our time? We worked with Ralph Tellis, consulting group, Stormwater staff, analyzed our meeting agendas and times, and we were surprised that we were spending 20% of our meetings on a particular item that probably could be done in 30 seconds. So we revamped our agenda, and at the recommendation of this consulting group, are spending more time in what I call forecasting. How can we plan for stormwater's future? How can we use technology in a way that can decrease what I call the two V's, the volume and velocity of stormwater? How can we continue to be cutting edge? And so when I think about the future of stormwater, the Rose Lane example is an example of using technology and human insight to impact people's lives. In my opinion, all the work we do is around public safety and positively impacting people's lives. Stormwater can cause flooding and can do devastation. Now, we can't engineer for an extreme event, like what happened in Asheville. I think Wayne will talk a little bit about that. But we can engineer for the normal plus event. And if we can engineer and work and pass policy in such a way that we are stormwater smart and people are safe, then that makes a good city of Raleigh. Then we are being good stewards of the environment and being good stewards of water.
Yes, thank you, Father Taylor. Agree with everything you said. It really is all about public safety, keeping our community safe, more aware. Thank you for coming out. I mean, this is a huge goal of ours, is to engage the community, get your input, tell you about the programs that we have, and get your feedback on how we can make those even better for the future. I do want to acknowledge Helene. It's been on everyone's minds. Very horrific event. The impacts were devastating to Western North Carolina. And while we can never fully be prepared for something like that, I think the storm provides a stark reminder that even though we're 120 miles inland, we are not immune to the impacts of large tropical events. And climate change, we are seeing the statistics in the rainfall, is creating larger storms, more intense storms, slower moving storms, which drop more rainfall. And so we need to work as a community to be more resilient, be more aware of those impacts. For perspective, was anyone here for Hurricane Fran in 1996? Okay, quite a few of you remember. That was a pretty significant event, right? Lots of flooding across Raleigh. That was about 8 inches of rainfall. Helene dropped 20 to 25 inches of rainfall, or more in some places. So from that perspective, we have not seen an event anything like that. And honestly, I believe it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So we work each and every day to be better prepared. You can't be fully prepared, but we can pass floodplain regulations as we have to restrict development. We can work to get existing development out of the floodplain to be more resilient. We can install green stormwater infrastructure to try to restore and mimic nature as much as possible. And we have a flood early warning system, which honestly is one of the best in the country. This is some of the technology Father Taylor mentioned. It gives us a preview of the storm and what the impacts are going to be. And that gives us advance notice where we can get word out to the community. We can pre-position responses, barricades, pre-notify residents. For Hurricane Debbie a couple of months ago, we put a construction sign out at Rose Lane because our models were predicting it was going to flood the next day. So we let those residents know in a construction sign that we were predicting flooding. That gives them advance notice. It helps them be more prepared, more safe. But we still need the community to be aware, to listen when we issue alerts and notifications, and when those flashing signs are flashing saying high water, please don't drive through them. It's dangerous. You don't know what is under that flowing water. So I'm optimistic that we as a community can pull together, we can continue to make improvement, and we can use technology, and we can be stormwater smart. That's our tagline. But we can be smart. We also need to help the community be smarter about how to be prepared and more resilient.
Thank you both so much. Can we get a round of applause for Father Taylor and Mary Miles? We have time probably for one question. As Pat mentioned, you have colored note cards, sticky cards on your table. If you have a question and you want to jot it down and hand it up, a member of staff will come and pick it up, and then my colleague Matt Clem will come and moderate questions if you have them. Please.
I'd just like to take this opportunity while you're thinking of questions. I want to thank Father Taylor. Here we are, as he mentioned, nearing the end of his 6th year on SMAC. I have been here for 6.5 years, and 6 of those have been working with Father Taylor on the Stormwater Management Advisory Commission. We're going to miss you, sir. You have helped bring an important perspective to SMAC and to the stormwater program that we would not have gotten otherwise. So I want to acknowledge the huge contributions you've made. Thank you for your service and all the time that you've given our program. It's truly been a pleasure working with you.
Looks like we have a few questions, and I'll note that all of your questions and all of your feedback will be recorded and published online, so anonymously, but we're taking note of all this. All of the comments you provide are feeding into the next comprehensive plan, so stormwater, environmental resources, issues. So we're keeping track of things. Go ahead, Matt.
Here's how. We on? Hello? All right. How do you currently bring awareness to residents of stormwater programs?
Yes, so as many ways as possible, and we're always open to new ideas. Events like this, obviously, we do have a watershed planning program. The city is broken up into about 23 watersheds, and we have prioritized where we do focused watershed studies in those areas. We have considered equity in terms of how we prioritize those watersheds, because we know that complaints are not made equitably, so we don't want to rely on complaints to drive projects. We want to go out, do our own field studies. So as part of those watershed studies, we have public engagement events. If you get a mailer, please come out to the watershed event. We will also, as part of the surveys, as I said, capture demographic information, and we track that demographics compared to what we know the demographics is in that watershed, and then we will tailor additional outreach and education events. For example, we have done pop-up meetings in neighborhoods with tents on the street right after work, where we capture people as they're coming home and engage them. We'll do pop-ups at community events where parents are picking up their kids, or there are other events that are going on. And of course, there's the city's website is a wonderful resource. Please use that. There's a lot of information there. We have stormwater email distribution. Follow Raleigh Water, #Raleigh Water. You get a lot of information that way. And but we are always open to other engagement opportunities and encourage people to give suggestions.
Okay. Anticipating the effects of climate change and seeking resiliency is consideration being given to bumping up the city's floodplain regulations to discourage redevelopment in flood-prone areas?
So yes, in fact, in 2023, the city did pass more restrictive floodplain regulations with that specific issue in mind. And so whereas prior to that, development was only restricted in the flood zone closest to the creek, now we have extended those floodplain regulations all the way out to the future 100-year floodplain. And get on IMAPS is another great, that the map that's up there is from IMAPS. The city has a wonderful mapping tool. If you've not been on there, I encourage you to do that. You can look at where flood-prone properties are. And actually another app that I've started using myself is Realtor.com. Has flood risk information integrated into the mapping part of Realtor.com. And that's good for when they're selling properties as well as when people are renting properties. Because, and again, if I might, this is an equity issue as well that I think is really important for the community to realize. When people purchase homes, they know if it's in the floodplain because their mortgage company tells them they have to buy flood insurance. And they do, because the mortgage company has to protect their interests. There is not a corresponding disclosure requirement for rental properties. More than half of the people in Raleigh rent. And so there is no way to know, for those people looking at renting a property, if that property is flood prone without them doing their own research and education. And so that's really important to spread the word. Realtor.com is a good way to do that research. The IMAPS is a good way to do that research. And I have actually asked the city attorneys, can't we just pass a city law that says they have to disclose it? No, we are not able to do that because we have not been given that power by the state legislature. So the only avenue we have is education. So this is it. We will continue to do our best job educating people, but that's a really important issue for people to understand and learn from.
Well, thank you. Again, we have all of your questions, so we'll develop kind of a response to the questions you submitted and make that available to everyone on our project website. And then if you signed up as an email, we'll send you all an email with that.